The wave of protests sweeping across the Middle East and North Africa has been described as revolutionary.
We are saying enough for this regime! This is a corrupt regime! We are saying enough for this regime!
Whether this is an accurate description of what is taking place remains to be seen, and depends upon how you define a revolution.
Egypt was one example where I spoke to a lot of activists who introduced me to people that the government would just, the police, as you know, they had an state of emergency that has lasted since 1981, and the police would just pull people off the streets, douse them in kerosene, set them ablaze. I met several of these people recovering from burns from the police. Went to Sudan and spoke to a lot of young people who did not have access to the internet but were fighting a government that was bombing them. I arrived in a village in Sudan where just a week before the government had bombed this village, and this is in order to build an oil pipeline.
It certainly is unprecedented, as decades of repressed anger has erupted onto the streets. There are many dimensions to this atmosphere of revolution, which range from the ideological to the political, social and economic, with every aspect interlinked and interdependent.
I think the regimes in Africa who are still trying to control information and work in this space are going to do more of this. And for countries in Africa that are beginning, and activists and election modeling groups and others in Africa that are working in this space, and Zimbabwe is an important example coming up, we're going to have to anticipate that these regimes learn from each other, that these environments are getting tougher, and the activists just don't have the advantage. When you can control your infrastructure, we're in a very difficult and challenging situation.
After decades of living under oppressive dictatorship, the people of the Arab world are rising up to stake their claim to democracy. Inside the historic popular upheaval that began in Tunisia and is spreading to Egypt and across the vital region.
I've read things saying that if not for Facebook and Twitter, there would have been no revolution or no uprising in Egypt, or at least not a successful one. On the other side, I've read sort of more the views of a Malcolm Gladwell, who suggests that no, people have always had reasons to revolt and rise up, and certainly social media is not what people have depended on, and so it might be some sort of assistance, but it's certainly not crucial.
These autocratic governments are now limiting phone and internet access in a bid to contain the information flow outside their territory. But the internet has never faced anything like what happened in Egypt, when the government of a country with 80 million people and a modernizing economy cut off nearly all access to the network and shut down cell phone services.
You may be able to control 95% of your internet users in your country, but there's going to be a certain percentage of the population that figures out how to get around things, that figures out how to communicate. People have a fundamental desire to communicate, and the internet is not a panacea, but it's made that it's helped people realize that desire in a way that they had never been able to do that before.
The shutdown caused a 90% drop in data traffic to and from Egypt, crippling an important communication tool used by anti-government protesters and their supporters to organize and to spread their message.
Governments use three basic approaches to control information and squander political work. The first is they try and identify individuals so they can take action to discourage their participation, and I'll talk a bit about how they do that. The second is they try to block access to the services that people need to communicate and organize online through mobile monitoring and surveillance and things like that. And the third, and this is relatively new, is they're starting to use these platforms and services to counter the movements with direct propaganda. So they're actually infiltrating and getting involved in the social media.
In this intoxicating atmosphere of change that is inspiring the people to challenge the old autocratic order, the question at the heart of this social flux is the type of change necessary to transform the people's situation in Middle East and North Africa.
We have other regimes that are not pressing buttons to put them off, to switch off the internet, but really are doing things such as crowdsourced censorship that are being much more subtle in the way they approach the internet.
This question will determine the future of scientific research in the region, because revolutions by their nature create new thinking and systems.
I'm very confident that that despite the autocrats trying to find ways to control this space, there's still, it's not like we're living in a virtual world entirely. There's still the non-virtual world, and people will find ways to get around this. We've seen the steady march from, you know, people fighting against slavery, people fighting against colonialism, people fighting against the single-party states in Africa. So this is just a new wave.
The question is whether we are seeing a revolution that will present a new era of science and technology in the Arab world, or will it perpetuate the underachievement of science in the Arab world for over 2 centuries?